I'm Alan Wartes, and this is Think Radio Presents Think People. My guest today is emergency preparedness expert Nathan Whittington.
It's those little moments of humanity and seeing just that hope. You know, you're in the middle of a disaster and watching humanity come together to help each other out.
Yeah.
That is why I still do it. That is why I'm so passionate about this, because we can argue back and forth where we're at, where we're going, what we're doing, but at the end of the day, people will help people.
Think People is underwritten by High Country News, telling the ongoing story of the modern American West. Through in-depth journalism and thought-provoking writing, the magazine has inspired people to act on behalf of the American West for 50 years. Learn more at hcn.org.
Welcome to another great conversation on Think Radio. If you like Think People, then I know you'll enjoy the other shows in the Think Radio Presents family of podcasts. Think Business, a weekly discussion with entrepreneurs, innovators, and disruptors on sustainable business into the 21st century. Think Planet, conversations with thought leaders on important environmental issues. Subscribe to Think Radio Presents on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever else you get great content. And don't forget to help us spread the word by liking our social media channels and sharing the content we post. We're grateful to have you in the conversation on Think Radio Presents. We've got a great conversation ahead today. I'm really happy to have you along. And I want to tell you, once again, don't forget to go to thinkradiopresents.com and subscribe to our newsletter. You'll be glad you did. There's all kinds of premium content coming your way. And just staying up to date on upcoming interviews and so forth. And also go to patreon.com, find us there, Think Radio Presents, and become a supporter. Making a podcast is an expensive and time-consuming thing to do, and we need your help to keep it coming. You can also find Patreon at thinkradiopresents.com. There's a link there to make it nice and easy. Thanks for listening. My guest today is emergency preparedness expert Nathan Whittington. Whittington currently manages the Chemical Stockpile Emergency Preparedness Program for the state of Colorado, which is a real mouthful. And he's also an operations officer for the State Emergency Operations Center, where all of the responders gather when something's going down. Over the past 20 years, Nathan has been a boots-on-the-ground responder to numerous emergency events, including 9/11, Hurricanes Maria, Katrina, Irma, and has even been part of a team that responded to an Ebola outbreak. So he's got a wide range of experience, and we're looking forward to talking more about the issue of emergency preparedness in the modern world. Nathan?
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me.
No, this is a great opportunity. I appreciate it.
You know, I think it's fair to say that emergencies have existed in communities forever, for as long as people have been gathering together and living in tribes or communities. But I'm asking you, do you think it's also fair to say that in modern times, emergencies have taken on an entirely different character? Because of the technological complexity that we live with, the mobility that we live with, and frankly, things like, a changing climate that have made things a little more volatile at times. What do you think about that? Are we dealing with a whole new animal, really?
I don't know if we're dealing with a whole new animal. I think the people of Pompeii would say that we're kind of in the same boat that we were back then. It's still a disaster, and we're still trying to figure out how to to survive them. I do agree with you that we're looking at a whole different animal in the fact of our interdependencies. I mean, back then we were we're more resilient as an individual back in the 40s and the 50s and stuff like that. Whereas today we are very reliant on our technology. We're very reliant on the information we get, where we get it, and we're not as self-sustaining as we are, in my opinion, as we were back then. But the disaster is a disaster. It can happen, locally within Gunnison County. It can happen within the state of Colorado. It can happen within the U.S. or it can happen individually at your house. I mean, disasters happen every day.
Yeah, I guess that's true. The definition of an emergency really is when it's happening to you.
Right.
When it's across the globe, it's less of an emergency in people's minds. But anytime anything happens to you, it's an emergency. But really, the point I'm getting at, and I don't want to walk away from it too fast, is the scale of emergencies when they happen now tends to be, I don't know, there seems to be an escalation going on there. That, for instance, hurricanes that once were a once every 30-year event now seem to be happening with like regularity. Is there something that you could point to that say, yeah, just on a scale perspective, we're dealing with things that are much larger?
Well, I think we're dealing with larger storms for sure. I mean, when you've got this last year, if you look at Hurricane Harvey, then you had Hurricane Irma, and then you had Hurricane Maria that came back to back to back that tend to follow similar paths up the coast and everything along those lines. The complexity of the incidents really doesn't change as far as the size of the storm. In the emergency management, we're looking at that life safety, we're looking at preservation of property, and then we're looking at environmental impact of what does this emergency do to the community, whether it is a single-story house fire that can be an emergency to a small community, or Hurricane Harvey taking out Texas. We take the same principles and we apply those to the same disaster. It just may have greater resources that come in, or state, federal support that come in to help. Depending upon the impact to the community is how we adjust our resources coming in.
Well, and I recognize, and maybe I'm actually betraying myself with a question like that, because I also recognize that our perception of how big a disaster is has to do with whether the news media are covering it, right? And the attention that gets paid to certain disasters, whereas others may not get that kind of attention, but they're still important to the people.
Oh, they're very important to the people. I mean, it's as an emergency manager, you've got to be able to take that whole community approach that we're trying to ingrain in the communities that we support across the state of Colorado, and make the individual as resilient as the community, because one can't do without the other. They defined emergency management, or kind of gave an example of emergency management, to 4 legs of a chair. It starts with the individual. The individual's got to be prepared to support themselves. Then it would go to the county. The county's got to be resilient to support themselves. Then it would go to the state level. State level's got to be prepared to support themselves. And the 4th level is the federal. If none or all of those don't all work together, then your chair doesn't support it. Same aspect in a disaster response. If the individual's not prepared for a disaster, it's hard for the county to come in and offer help in that aspect.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because you already said there was a time when individuals were more prepared. They were more resilient by necessity.
Right.
Partly because they couldn't count on the county or the state or the feds being ready to respond wherever they were. We've come a long way in that respect. But at the same time, individuals have become less and less likely to even be thinking about preparedness, much less investing time and resources in it. Would you agree with that?
To a certain degree, I would. I think the culture over the past years has been a significant shift in individual preparedness. I think you've seen examples where counties have really put out the message to, become more resilient. We're starting to see more preparedness expos across the state of Colorado using social media for, the state of Colorado puts out a preparedness campaign every month that highlights specific things that individuals can do to become more prepared.
Things like what?
So this December is flu season. Signs and symptoms of flus, what to have in your house for cold weather emergencies. I saw one the other day that what to have in your vehicle for if you get stranded on the side of the road in a winter storm, what things should you have? And then, American Red Cross, and the emergency management community pushing out what a 72-hour pack looks like, being prepared for, a snow-in option or a snow-in event. What should you have in your house to survive that 72 hours with, just you and your family?
Yeah, and what happens if the power goes off?
Exactly.
And the heat stops working.
Exactly.
Well, so that information is available is what I'm hearing from you.
Very much so.
I don't have to create that wheel myself.
No, you don't. And State of Colorado Emergency Management does a great job through Ready Colorado. They push out social media campaigns that you can subscribe to, and they come to your phone and they just give you quick little snippets of information on how to be better prepared for a wide variety of things. So in the summer, it'll talk about heat stress, heat stroke, signs and symptoms of that, making sure you're staying hydrated, different topics throughout the year.
Yeah. What do you think is the resistance? Maybe resistance is the wrong word. Why aren't individuals more prepared? It seems like a no-brainer. I mean, if I'm going to drive over Monarch Pass in the wintertime, it's me and the road and my car. What keeps me from doing what it takes to have what I need?
I think the saying, it's never going to happen to me. That philosophy that, as emergency managers, we balance between it's never going to happen to me and we're all going to die. That we kind of sit in the middle and kind of manage that as to what we're looking for. But I think a lot of people think, well, that'll never happen to me. I live here in this area. A blizzard coming in would never happen to me. Well, it doesn't have to be a blizzard. It doesn't have to be a wildfire.
Yeah.
It could just be, a backhoe operating, cutting the fiber line to a community, and now you've got no cell support, you've got no Wi-Fi, you've got no cellular. Simple things of how do you communicate with your family if you can't communicate with them? Where are your backup places to go when you need that assurance that they're safe?
So in some ways, we're a little bit a victim of our routine security. We feel safe routinely, and so therefore we're not really thinking about those times.
Exactly.
And what advice would you give to people? Because you don't want to scare people into being afraid.
No, you don't want to scare them into being afraid, to be prepared because they're afraid. I think the message I would give to people is just when it does happen to you, what do you need to take care of your own? Because if you put it in the aspect of people taking care of people, people are more likely to help. So if you reach out to a mom or a dad and say, hey, if something were to go wrong, do you have everything for your kids? TSA came up with a great thing. When the oxygen mask falls, what do? Yeah. First thing you do is you put your own mask on, because if you can't help yourself, then you can't help the person next to you. So you got to make yourself prepared, able to breathe, then you can help the person next to you. But if you bring it in the fact of helping another person or helping your family or a grandmother or a grandfather that, can't rely on themselves, you've got to be prepared yourself before you can even start looking past the end of your nose.
That is a very interesting way to look at it, because I think even for myself, I might say, oh, I'm okay. I got this. I'll be fine. But if I start thinking about, no, I have responsibility for the people around me, that kind of changes how that looks. And it wouldn't even have to be a kid, maybe. What happens to my neighbors?
Right. And that brings in that whole community that, FEMA has been really driving, is that it takes, a community to recover a community. Because when a community goes through a disaster, you rely on your neighbors and your friends and your family to help you not only recover the community as a whole, but recover your own individuality back to what you were. Neighbors helping neighbors. They come in, they help out, they rebuild your family, and they rebuild you.
Yeah, and you do see that, right? Yep. When a disaster happens, that's exactly what you see.
Exactly what you see. I mean, if you take the day after 9/11, what did you see across the United States? Flags everywhere. God bless America. It was a nationwide unification that, because of a reason I hope we never see again, but that's what you see even in some of the smaller disasters, Puerto Rico and St. Thomas and, Joplin, Missouri. That community came together to help that community survive. And Joplin's a great example of a community that realized they had an incident happen to them, but their recovery from it made them more resilient to the point where, if another tornado comes through Joplin, Missouri, they're not going to have the same amount of devastation because they learned from the lessons that they went through.
Well, that's an interesting point too, that a disaster can actually make you stronger.
Disaster defines resiliency. We try to define what resiliency is, but if we don't understand what the baseline of where we need to be resilient to, it makes that definition even harder.
Mm-hmm.
So even a personal tragedy. I mean, you go through a car wreck. You total your car. Well, the next car you may buy may be more resilient, or it may have snow tires on it so that doesn't happen to you again. In essence, you've increased your own resiliency as a person to not allow that single vehicle accident have the same effect that you may have on you again. Or it may be as simple as saying, next time I'm going to wear my seatbelt.
Yeah, right. Well, and so preparedness then is a way to get to the lessons faster, not be blown off your groove so hard by a disaster because you weren't prepared that you can't, it takes you much longer to be better and stronger.
Exactly, definitely. I look at Gunnison County. You guys have an emergency manager here, Scott Morrell. He is, doing everything he can to increase the preparedness of Gunnison. He uses a system called Code Red. It's a wide area alert notification system where at a simple keystroke, he can send a message out to the entire community, giving them visibility of something that's going on. So,
yeah, whether it's a flood or something of that nature.
Correct. And he can also send out preparedness messages through, his website and his social media that are relevant to Gunnison County and the city of Gunnison and make them realistic.
Yeah. So you were at 9/11.
I was.
In what role?
We were there as part of a team that was searching the rubble for remains.
Well, that's about as boots on the ground as it gets.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that experience. What was that like?
It was the cornerstone of my background now. It allowed for me to find my passion and do what I want to do with where I'm at. Being part of something like that was intense. But what I did realize is that there is a need for what we do, and there is a need for emergency management and how we relate that emergency management back to our local communities to help better prepare firefighters, law enforcement, EMS, county, citywide folks to recover from a tragedy.
Well, and that includes the responders, too.
Correct.
Preparing those people to do something like sift through rubble, not knowing what they'll find.
Right.
Is that a part of what you do as well?
Yes. I mean, to a certain degree. We work with our law enforcement, our firefighters, to give them kind of from the emergency management perspective of how do we coordinate resources to help them in the field. So when you have an event like 9/11 or any disaster where the local resources are taxed, we can help as emergency managers bring in mutual aid from other counties to backfill those positions so that either the firefighters can go home, make sure their family's safe, law enforcement make sure their families are safe, and know that there are people there to help them, and then also expedite the stabilization of the incident.
Well, because one of the things that people often forget when a disaster rolls through a community, a large scale one, let's say a hurricane, the responders are just as impacted by that as anyone else. I mean, the local people, the people on the local fire department, the local police officers, local medical professionals.
Right.
Their homes are flooded as well.
Correct.
And so a more coordinated effort is intended to relieve those people, perhaps, to go take care of what they need to do as well?
A little bit of both. So there's a program, it's called EMAC, which is the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, that states participate in. And what it is it's a state-to-state call for help. So during the hurricanes, during the fires, the state of Colorado can reach out to our counties and our local law enforcement and fire departments and Colorado Task Force 1, which has search and rescue capability and everything like that. And we can say, hey, look, the state of Florida is in need of help for swift water rescue or debris removal or whatever it is. And we can send Colorado assets and resources down there because we're having a blue sky day or we're not having any incidents that's pulling or taxing our resources. And what that does is that allows those firefighters that have been on the ground now for couple days, go home, check on their family, breathe, take a break, take a nap, and backfill some of those positions and give them the depth that they may have to. Because a lot of rural counties here in Colorado are still volunteer fire departments.
Yeah.
So
Most of them, in
most
fact.
of them. So, we're seeing where we can help not only county to county through mutual aids, but state to state now through that EMAC program.
Yeah. Because look, there's a lot of jargon that goes into this profession. It's inevitable, acronyms, and it starts to sound like it's all about resources and moving this from here to there. At the end of the day, it's about people.
Oh, very much so. And you're absolutely right. And I apologize. When we're talking,
that wasn't a criticism.
when we're talking resources, it could be anything from a fire truck to it could be a 30-person search and rescue team, or it can be a healthcare team that's going down to help inside of a hospital because the nurses have been, on shift for 3 or 4 days. But you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, it is all about people helping people. And what can we do as a society, as a nation, to come together to help our brothers and sisters get through their bad day and get their lives back to normalcy as quickly as possible?
Yeah. The other side of that is that sometimes the public has this expectation, and I think it's partly because of how we consume the news, that we also see acronyms. It's FEMA going out and responding, but really, it's people.
It's people.
I mean, they're organized into these organizations, and they've got structures and bureaucracies and so forth. We get it. But at the end of the day, it's people that are dropping what they're doing and going to help.
It's people leaving their families, their day-to-day jobs, their lives, putting those on hold to go help somebody.
Well, and let's be clear, at times putting their lives at risk.
Very much so. So the team that I belong to, we were on the ground 24 hours before Irma made landfall on St. Thomas. And we were there to help rebuild a hospital that just, in the end of the day, the hospital was just absolutely, we couldn't do much in there because as it would rain in the afternoon, it would flood in the hospital during the day. So we were outside building, MASH-style hospital setup so that the hospital could still do what the hospital needed to do during the response, during the recovery, because they couldn't use their hospital. The aspect that came out of that was people helping people. It was nurses from California 6 DMAT going into St. Thomas and taking over the hospital so that those nurses could go home and see their kids and make sure everything was fine and get the floodwaters out of their house and try to get power restored back to their livelihoods. And then, they would come in and rotate through, and it created a family within the hospital to where when we were leaving out of there, it was almost saying goodbye to family.
I bet that's right.
So,
does it take a psychological and emotional toll on responders, even when they're not on site, responding to something specific, just to be in that mindset all the time of thinking about the worst case scenario?
Yes, I mean you're seeing that come through now in the suicide rate of law enforcement officers and fire departments and the first responders as a whole. Disaster response is no different. I battled my own depression through what I've seen and what I've done. But what I come back to, and it goes right to your same point, it's all about people. I know that I can reach out to any of the team members I deploy with when I'm having a bad day or they're having a bad day. Our phones are always on. And at a drop of a hat, I could name 4 or 5 names that would come on an airplane to Denver, Colorado tomorrow to be there for me, and vice versa. You form your own family, your own network, and then you're starting to see more outreach for that. And I think that's something that we need to keep pursuing and looking at, is the outreach for our first responders and their ability to be able to have a coping mechanism, a place to talk to, realize they're not alone. What they're seeing in the streets, they're seeing at a disaster. There are people there. There's a support mechanism for them to do.
Yeah. Well, beyond this kind of community that you're talking about, people that you can call on, what would make things easier? What can society do you think, to make things easier for first responders? Is there anything on your mind?
I think just being actively engaged in your own community, knowing, what your hazards are. So Gunnison County, a snow event. You guys had one of those a couple years ago.
Yeah, boy, did we.
Where, being self-resilient and allowing, your local emergency managers and your local response personnel to really know that, hey, this community is resilient in this aspect, so we're going to focus on this one. And then, just knowing what your risks are, knowing what your own hazards are, and being ready for them.
So now we're back to individual preparedness.
Correct.
You can make life easier on your first responders just by being ready yourself, having done a lot of that work.
Well, being ready and being, prepared for it. And there's a lot of resources out there. The American Red Cross has a lot of training opportunities that you can take that, make you community ready. I know Gunnison County has, a variety of trainings that they do. And then, working here this week with Western University, making sure that, that the students, understand what preparedness and resiliency is, because they're going to go forth and be able to take that message to wherever they go. I mean, not all of them are going to stay here in Gunnison, but if you can just start that conversation and have that conversation with your family, what if? What if I can't make it home? What are you going to do?
That's interesting, because one of my guests recently was a funeral director, and we talked about the fact that people are really reluctant to have hard conversations.
Yeah.
Like, let's talk about what happens if mom or dad suddenly isn't here anymore. And it's the same category, I think. Let's sit down and talk about where are the exits to the house? I mean, let's start there. Where are the extra batteries for the flashlight? People are not having this conversation.
I think people are having the conversations. I think they're having them in a very 30,000-foot level, and they need to bring it down to, like you're saying, what if? Yeah. Unfortunately, my dinner table is, it is that conversation. It is very tactical. My 11-year-old knows where to go.
But that's right.
But even a school shooting, I mean, he knows where to run to when, if we can't get there or something. We've had these conversations, and I think as a generation that I live in, we need to have these conversations with our kids. We need to prepare them, because then, as a parent, I know my son has a plan, which then brings a little bit of a calm over me, knowing that, hey, look, if he follows the plan, he's going to go here. If he follows the plan, if I get snowed in and I can't make it home from work, I know he's going to do this. And it starts to bring a little bit of calmness to it, instead of just reacting out of stress or anxiety or confusion.
So, extrapolating from what you just said, then emergency preparedness is very much a self-interested thing to do.
So we use the phrase a disaster starts and ends locally. So it can be, like I was talking earlier, your house fire. It starts and ends with the conversations you have. It starts and ends with your county leaders and your county emergency managers, because we don't know what we don't know. So if you're having those conversations, we can help better assist with what you need.
And it's just all about making your own life easier.
Very much so.
And less frightening.
Exactly.
How did you get into this business?
So I actually got into this business because I was part of a team in Pueblo County that had fire, dive, law enforcement, search and rescue, and a medical team. And I got picked up by the disaster medical assistance teams out of Denver. And from there, we traveled around from disaster to disaster, because I was an EMT and working the shelters from Hurricane Katrina, and then just kept going up the food chain, basically.
Nothing along the way made you say, "Oh, I'm done."
Many things along the way made me say I'm done, but it's those little moments of humanity and seeing just that hope. You're in the middle of a disaster and watching humanity come together to help each other out.
Yeah.
That is why I still do it. That is why I'm so passionate about this, because we can argue back and forth where we're at, where we're going, what we're doing, but at the end of the day, people will help people.
We've got a long history of that.
We do. We have a very long history of that.
What's an example of a story that you wouldn't mind sharing that sticks out in your mind as one of those moments of humanity?
We were at the shelter for Ike, Hurricane Ike, and we had we probably had 300 to 500 people in the shelter that we were managing, and it was this little kid's 9-year-old birthday. And his mother was just absolutely distraught that, she was in a shelter. She had nothing. They couldn't do anything. So the team that I was deployed with, we went through every MRE that we could find that would make things edible.
An MRE is a meals ready to eat.
Thank
one
you.
Of those,
Sorry.
One of those freeze-dried packages that our military subsist on.
And we found everything that was edible in that package, and we made a birthday cake. And we had a birthday party for this kid in the middle of a shelter. And, it started off with just us trying to do the thing, but then it turned into this community within the shelter just came together. And, we had games for the kid, and we were doing story times for the kid. And we were just, and it was, everybody in that shelter was singing happy birthday to this kid. No matter how long they had been in there, what they had gone through, but that disaster stopped right there. Yeah. And it was amazing. And this little kid just, he forgot the fact that he was sleeping on a cot at, Louisiana State University, LSU. He got to have a birthday. And I don't know if it touched him as much as it did me, but those are the moments that in all this chaos, in all this crisis, and all this disaster, we brought normalcy. Even if it was just for 2 hours, this kid forgot everything that was going outside of these walls, and we had a party.
I would wager that he will never forget that birthday.
Well, I won't. That's for sure. I never will.
Well, and it sounds like dozens of other people.
Correct.
We'll be telling that story for a long time. Huh. Nathan, thank you so much for joining me and sharing this perspective with us.
Oh, no problem. This was a great opportunity, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, good luck out there.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Join us next week for another great conversation on Think Radio Presents Think People.